On today's video, we're going to talk about crime by race in the state of Florida. I recently did a video about the crime problem in Lee County, Florida, particularly the city of Fort Myers. And many people said that the reason Fort Myers went to crap is because of Latinos and Hispanics. Let's take a look at some of the comments that we got on that video so we can understand the general idea that people have about crime by race in Florida. Now, this person said a city is a direct reflection of the people who live there, and that wasn't exactly a direct comment. That might be passive aggressive. Other people on today's video were even more direct, saying wherever there's diversity, trouble follows. It's a known fact. Sometimes the truth hurts. The beautiful thing about this comment is that we have race maps, and we know that the most diverse places in Florida are the western edge of Broward County. South Florida in general is very diverse, so is the Orlando area, and the least diverse region of Florida is the northern half of the state. So we have information on race, we have information on crime, and we can actually see if this person is really right or wrong. And on today's video, you're going to get the answer to this question. Now, if you're subscribed to my channel, you're probably already laughing because you know we go over a lot of analytics on our channel. And this area of Broward County, South Florida, and the area of Orlando, the cities have the lowest homicide rates, the lowest drug overdose rates. Just about every single category of crime, they are the best in the state. In fact, you can almost draw the complete opposite conclusion from analytical information, but we'll get to that later on in the video. But in fact, the areas in Florida that have the most diversity, nearly naming South Florida and the Orlando area, have the best analytics in just about every category you can think of, from homicide rates, firearm mortality rates. And these analytics go into even more obsolete areas beyond crime, like general health in general, just even like lung cancer. It doesn't even matter what category you're looking at. The areas of diversity are better at safety, crime, and health as well. We can compile different analytics of crime and health for days, and in every single category, there will be a correlation between areas that are more diverse and incomes, safety, because that's the way analytics work today. This following person just outright says that they've seen Hispanic people outright destroy neighborhoods in the Fort Myers area. So on today's video, we're going to get the answers to analytics and see if really Hispanics are more propense to crime and violence and all those things than other races. We're going to dive deep into this topic with real analytical information to give these people the answer they're looking for. So since this video was about Fort Myers, let's start off by looking at some overdose death rate analytics for Lee County. As you can clearly see, the white population in Lee County is more than 2 times as likely to die from a drug overdose than other races. Now, as we all know, drugs lead to homelessness and addiction and theft and crime, and even many of the homicides that happen are drug related. What does that tell you of who in Lee County is at the core of the violence and problems that are plaguing this county if we were going to look at it by race? Clearly, the white population would be at the heart of it. Yes, Fort Myers does have bad Hispanic and black neighborhoods. However, overwhelmingly, we all know the absolute worst neighborhoods in Fort Myers is areas like North Fort Myers that are about 80% white, and these are the areas where most of these drug overdoses are happening. Without a doubt, the crime in these communities like North Fort Myers are the most plagued areas for crime in all of Lee County, Florida. However, instead of focusing on these really troubled areas like North Fort Myers where all these drugs and drug overdoses are happening, the Lee County Sheriff's Office over patrols neighborhoods that are predominantly Hispanic, and that does distort crime analytics. Now, I believe in all types of analytics, but I really never talk about actual crime indexes on my YouTube channel for a few reasons. For one, every single police department does their own thing. Some police departments are going after criminals, and some police departments look the other way. What could be legal in one city can be illegal in the next. And some police departments, and particularly the state of Florida, St. Johns County, Lee County, these are police departments that purposely target specific areas and specific races more than others, and that completely distorts crime analytics. I like analytics like homicide rates, I like analytics like drug overdose rates, because these are crimes that, well, cannot be faked, cannot be distorted. If somebody dies, it has to be recorded, whether it's from a homicide or a drug overdose. These are metrics that are very hard to disfigure, distort, based on the narrative that a law enforcement agency may be trying to pass on. I was the first YouTuber doing this, and now countless other YouTubers have picked up my model of looking at drug overdoses and homicide rates to determine safety, because clearly we now understand that these crime analytic indexes are complete garbage. In fact, most people have abandoned these metrics of analytics. If you remember who was the first YouTuber to do that, you'll know it was me. Our YouTube channel was the first to pick up this type of metric to devise analytics on safety, and now it has become the standard not only for YouTubers, but just for anybody talking about crime these days. But I figured this out way before everybody else. You just can't depend on information you're getting from law enforcement agencies. And even official websites like Florida Health that we're using to talk about today's crime analytics also have their discrepancies. For example, their estimates of the homeless population still come directly from a county level, and those numbers in Florida are reported at about 30,000, but we know it's closer to 100,000. So even when dealing with overdose death rates and homicide rates, you still have to use a world of discretion with where the information is coming from, since it's no secret that the best crime reduction tool that many law enforcement agencies have is misinformation about the reality. I mean, just take Lee County, Florida, the subject of today's video. We're talking about Lee County, understanding that crime here has been out of control lately. Drug overdose death rates are the highest they've ever been. Yet the sheriff of Lee County says that crime is at a 50-year low. Anybody who's lived in the Naples and Fort Myers area for over 20 years like I have would know that that is an absolute slap in the face to anybody who believes it. But that's the reality of situations right now in Florida. It's not exactly what the real analytical information says, but the goal of the people dispersing that information. And many times it's to, well, deceive the public, and many times they believe because it's coming from an official source like a sheriff that they can believe this information. But we're a little bit smarter than that, aren't we? Truly, nobody's actually going to believe that crime in Fort Myers and Lee County has improved when we have now entire sections of the county that are homeless camps, a situation that didn't exist, let's say, prior to 2015, at least on the scale that it is now. But sadly, the masses do believe this information or misinformation that's coming from these official sources, and they draw up conclusions like the 3 comments we've seen today, where they really believe that it's diversity that's destroying America, when in reality, if you look at income, safety, any category really today, even health, it's gotten to the point where it's not just crime analytics, even health analytics are starting to reflect the areas that are doing best and the areas that are doing worse. Analytics aren't deceiving. It's just the way people are using information to get their agendas, to get their points out in a way that is completely, well, distorted. Drug overdose death rates in the entire state of Florida are as follows: 37 per 100,000 for the white population. That's significantly higher than a state like California at 26. Yet, despite the fact that we have real comparable analytics from both of these states, many officials in Florida would tell you that it's California that has a drug problem. Interesting. Hard to prove analytically. 37 for whites, 26 per 100,000 for blacks. Blacks in Florida are significantly less likely to overdose than whites. Interestingly enough, many law enforcement agencies like Brevard County, Volusia County, Lee County, St. Johns County, just to name a few, have gone strictly hard on these black communities, saying that they are at the heart of the drug overdose problem, when the analytics prove the complete opposite. Now, Hispanics come in at the lowest for drug overdose death rates at 16 per 100,000. That is more than 2 times as likely to happen to a white person in the state of Florida. So if the Hispanic population is less than half as likely to overdose than the white population, we can clearly see where the heart of the drug problem lies in Florida. And it's no secret that 100,000 Americans are dying every single year from drug overdoses. Over 7,000 of those deaths happen in the state of Florida. Despite the state of California having almost 2 times the population of Florida, the actual number of people overdosing in Florida isn't too far behind from California. We know that homelessness and crime and many of the problems that we're facing in society today derive directly from drug addiction. That's not a secret. It's actually at the core of the theft, the crime, the lawlessness. Many of the issues that we're facing in society today, if not a vast majority of them, derive directly from drug use. This drug consumption is what leads to crime. It leads to homicides. It leads to a lot of pain and suffering in our country. And the core of this problem lies within the white population. Despite the fact that this problem is plaguing the white communities, the counties are saying, hey, it's the black people that are doing this, or it's a Hispanic. And unfortunately, people fail to look at the real numbers and analytics. And the question is, could these law enforcement agencies use the same policies that they've been using on inner city areas and treat people in suburban America the same way, since after all, they are the problem, right? It's really a laughable notion that law enforcement would treat white people the way they treat other communities, despite the fact that today crime really is more prevalent among the white population. Despite that, the persecution continues against African American communities and Latino communities, despite the fact that analytically they're not at the heart of the problem anymore. I mean, you don't spray for cockroaches in your bedroom, you spray for cockroaches in the bathroom and the kitchen. You don't spray for bed bugs in the kitchen cabinets, you spray for bed bugs in the bedroom. We know where the problem is, but we also know that this is the United States.
She will be tried as a black adult.
This court finds it fitting to try the defendant as an African American. Henceforth.
Yeah, we live in a country where even the notion of equality and justice is laughable, and that's very sad. Now, when it comes to firearm injuries, namely getting shot, African Americans are 5 times more likely to get shot in Florida than the white population, with a rate of 51 per 100,000. That's alarming. Now, that rate is significantly higher for African Americans living in rural north central Florida counties. It's the lowest in suburban counties like Charlotte, Collier, and Broward. It's dishearteningly bad in places like Duval and Dade County. However, I do want to point out the misconception that many people have today that it's actually inner city blacks that are at the heart of the gun violence problem. It's really bad in inner cities. Miami, Duval, these counties have a huge inner city problem with black people getting shot. But interestingly enough, that rate is significantly higher in rural counties, particularly in North Florida, where there is the least diversity. There aren't too many outsiders in that part of the state. In fact, we actually did an entire video series with long videos like the one we're watching today about how Hispanics and blacks are actually in more danger in these rural communities. Analytically, we're talking about overdose death rates, we're talking about homicide rates, just about in every category you could think of. Hispanics and blacks in these rural counties are seriously disadvantaged. But the narrative continues that inner city blacks are the heart of crime in America, but in reality, they're being victimized at an even faster, higher rate in these rural communities, but nobody seems to want to talk about that. By the time you get into suburban counties like Collier, Charlotte, Broward, those numbers kind of level off to a point where it isn't really a problem, at least to the degree that people depict it. Now, when it comes to poverty levels for the African American community, there are some counties, again, suburban areas like Broward, Collier, Sarasota. Surprisingly, Pasco County is on this list. These types of suburban counties actually have very good analytics for African Americans when it comes to percentage of the population living in poverty. Now, the disparaging number is that in some counties it's as low as 3%, which is great. And in some counties, it's as high as 30 times that, which is horrible. So we can see that where African Americans choose to live makes a huge impact on the percentage of the population that will be in poverty. This county is Wakulla County, right outside of Tallahassee in the Big Bend region. They actually have the lowest percentage of the African population in poverty at around 3%. The same thing can be said about Hispanics and whites. This county, for some reason, doesn't have very bad poverty rates. It's the best in the entire state of Florida. A round of applause for Wakulla County for having the least poverty among all races in the entire state of Florida. This county also has low overdose death rates, and in a lot of categories, they just exceedingly do well in the state of Florida. So if you want to move to a good rural county in Florida, out in the middle of nowhere, this county really seems exempt from the problems plaguing the rest of the state of Florida. But keep in mind, it's not too far from a really bad region of the state. As you scroll through Florida Health, you'll notice that this region of Florida up here as a whole has a lot of problems, and some of the worst counties in the entirety of the state of Florida are up here. But there's a few counties that are the exception to the rule in this generally really crappy region of Florida. It's interesting that there's a few rural counties up here where the white population is as likely to get shot as inner city blacks. But again, these are the types of analytics that you rarely hear about. If you look at the southern half of the state of Florida and Orlando, the areas with the most diversity, you notice that those areas are actually the best for the white population getting shot as well. And you can clearly make out that suburban and urban whites in the state of Florida are a lot less likely of getting shot than those living in the heart of South Central Florida and in North Central Florida and in the Florida Panhandle, areas that are predominantly rural white communities. Rural whites are significantly more likely to become the victim of a gunshot wound of some sort than urban whites. So again, that kind of dispels the myth that whites in the city need to move to rural areas because it's safer, but the analytics simply don't line up with that information. That's interestingly always coming from rural radio, but the reality is that yes, the white population in some of these rural counties has just as much of a violence problem as the African American inner city community. And I don't want to hear that it's because they're hunting. The levels of people being shot in these rural counties is as high as inner city black communities. That doesn't happen by accident. I don't know if you guys know this, but people are getting shot on purpose, and the percentage of people getting shot on purpose cannot possibly be the same as those being shot accidentally. That just doesn't register with logic. And if that statement was true, then we could also make the statement about gun safety, that guns do hurt people. So if you make the statement that these are hunting injuries, then, well, maybe guns shouldn't be around. It's a contradictory statement. So either way, you got to face the reality of this situation that literally these rural counties in North Central Florida are either so stupid and retarded that they're getting hurt as often as people in the inner city are getting shot on purpose. That doesn't check out in any possible way. Just don't let the door hit you on the way out if you do make that comment that the reason this is happening is because of hunting accidents. There's a lot more hunting actually in the Florida Everglades, in the southern tip of the state, than there is anywhere in North Central Florida, but they don't shoot themselves. Now, of course, if you want to sit here and try to make the argument that people hunting are as likely to shoot themselves as African Americans in the city are to get shot, go right ahead. It's completely up to you how retarded you want to depict your community, but if you want to make that statement, go ahead. It's not really possible to explain. And again, there's more hunting in the southern region of the state, hog hunting, turkey season, deer as well out in the Florida Everglades. It's much more difficult than North Central Florida, but people try it. I'm just I'm anticipating the explanations that some of these dumb hicks are going to try to make to explain why people are getting shot more up there than people in the inner city are, and how they're getting shot more than people that are getting shot on purpose, on accident. It just would raise a question mark about firearm safety, which is not what you want to do either, because that also, doesn't fit your narrative as well. So redundant of a topic, but yes. Continuing with unfounded claims that people make about race and violence and crime is the notion that the reason why the white population is overdosing so much is because Hispanics lead to that. Well, you can see in Hardy and Henry County some of the lowest drug overdose rates for the white population. And don't even get me started on Miami-Dade. It's the lowest in the entire state of Florida. Yet that rate is really high for Duval. That's Jacksonville, that doesn't have a large Hispanic population. It's really high for Escambria County, which has literally no Hispanics. So you can see that there is a correlation where if a white population is adjacent to a Hispanic population, they actually have less drug overdose deaths. So when white populations are adjacent to Hispanic populations, there are less overdose deaths. And the more distant they are from Hispanic populations, the more isolated they are from the Hispanic element, the more likely those communities are to have very high drug overdose death rates among the white population, like it is with Duval and Pensacola, and not the case in Hardy and Henry County areas that are very much integrated with Hispanic communities. And this isn't just a Florida analytic. There's a national correlation. The state of Texas has one of the lowest drug overdose rates of any state, and they are right next to the border, right? They have more border than any other state, but they also have the lowest drug overdose death rate. What does that tell you? That when the white population is adjacent to Hispanic communities, they don't have that problem. A lot of people have really tried to blame the overdose death rate problem on the Hispanic community, saying that they're the ones bringing it in. But the highest drug overdose death rates are actually in the states, not just, it happens in the state of Florida regionally, right? But zoom out a little bit on a state level, West Virginia, Maine, Kentucky, Tennessee, these are states that don't have large Hispanic communities. They're now at the heart of the drug overdose crisis. These are the states with the highest drug overdose death rates. And the states that have the most Hispanics, California, Texas, New York, have the lowest. Now, the state of Florida is the exception to the rule, because the state of Florida, if it was just the southern half of Florida where all the Hispanics are, it would rank among California, Texas, and New York. But the drug overdose death rate for the northern half of Florida, which is where most of the white rural population is so high that it offsets Florida out of the state's categories that are similar to Florida. So if Florida were two different states, the southern half of Florida, South Florida, would be on par with California, Texas, New York, which just goes to show that the reality is that it's communities like West Virginia and Maine that have the lowest percentage of foreign-born population and actually have the highest drug overdose death rates. So to draw a correlation between white overdoses in Hispanic communities, the complete opposite is analytically true. Now, if you have an explanation for that, I'd love to hear it. My polemical explanation has always been that there's a correlation between racism and drug consumption, but when I say that, people just get furious at me, but it seems like analytically would make sense that there's a correlation there. Beautiful house. Look at this little house right here. And again, this is the little town of Sop Choppy. This is located in Wakulla County. This is the county that has the best analytics for incomes, not so much highest incomes, but least percentage of the population in poverty of all races. So it's a place where everybody's kind of living good. And not like high income good, but at least not people living in poverty good. In other words, they're not exceedingly high on incomes, but at least nobody in this community is in extreme poverty. It's just a place that is just kind of a nice rural community, and there's no other way of saying it. But it is in a region of the state that has a lot of problems like we've talked about. Now, for the white population, when it comes to incomes, the entire east coast of Florida seems to be really good for the white population for incomes, percentage of the population that isn't living in poverty. You can clearly make out South Central Florida with the exception of Orlando, and of course that north central part of Florida that's really plagued in every single category. And of course little counties like you can see Sarasota, Cortland are good counties for white incomes, or better worded, percentage of the population in poverty being the lowest. And when you look at the Hispanic population, the areas that are good for Hispanic incomes are also the same areas that are good for white incomes. So there is a real good correlation between white incomes and Hispanic incomes. They correlate fairly well, with the same areas being hostile to Hispanics being hostile to whites when it comes to many people living in poverty in a county. Just goes to show that these are just regional correlations in general. Those areas are bad for everybody, not just one particular group. Without a doubt, we can all agree that poverty leads to crime, and there is a poverty-crime correlation. I think nobody's going to dispute that. So these are areas that are just going to be bad for everybody who lives in them in general. And in the state of Florida, those areas are north central Florida, parts of the Panhandle, and again, the heart of south central Florida, with the exception of the Orlando area. So those regional problems go beyond all race. And I think something we can learn about today's video is that there's places like the east coast of Florida that are good for whites, good for Hispanics, good just about for everybody. And there's areas that are bad for everybody. It seems that more of these regional forces are much more powerful than the actual ethnicity of the individual. Ethnicity and race make somewhat of a difference, but regional differences in the economy and crime have a much stronger hold. In other words, today many people in the United States, predominantly the white population, believe that it's the race that makes a difference with these analytics. And it is true for some categories like drug overdoses. But in general, the specific county and region that you live in is a bigger determining factor in those analytics. Without a doubt, if you were to study today's metrics, you would understand that the region that you live in of the state makes a much better difference than your actual race. Many people do believe that Hispanics take white jobs, but we saw that the areas that are good for Hispanics are also good for whites. When it comes to economy, everybody benefits together. Now, when it comes to whites living in poverty, I did notice that counties that have very large Hispanic populations can sometimes lead to really high poverty rates among the white population. That case can be made in Hardy County, DeSoto County, but then there's a few outlying factors. For example, the poverty rate among whites in, let's say, Dixie County is actually higher than Dade County. Dixie County is mostly white people, and Dade County is mostly Hispanics. So yeah, you could find a few examples if you wanted to prove the point that, Hispanics take white jobs, and if there's a larger Hispanic population, then you're more likely to have more white people living in poverty. And there's a few counties like DeSoto County, Henry County, Hardy County, where you could find analytical information that would almost prove, yes, if there's a larger Hispanic population, then the whites are more likely to be in poverty. But then you can also find counties that will prove the complete opposite, like the case of Miami-Dade County, mostly a Hispanic county, but Dixie County, mostly a white county. There are more whites living in poverty there. So again, those are examples where you can find analytical information that could prove one point or the other. And it may be that in the case of Miami, the Hispanic population doesn't take anything from the white population, but in Arcadia or Hardy County, for example, or DeSoto County, these places like in South Central Florida, it could be that in these rural communities, Hispanics really are taking white jobs. It's possible that in rural communities, opportunities are so limited that if a Hispanic person moves into that area and they work harder, they will take a white job. So in those particular areas, it is definitely possible, especially since they're less educated, that a Hispanic person has the same earning potential as a white could take their job. But that's not the case in cities. But again, white people that live in cities are significantly less likely to be on drugs. White people that live in cities are significantly less likely to get shot in any circumstance. So the analytics and education levels for urban whites are so much higher than for rural whites that, in fact, at heart, the issue could just be that whites that live in the city are just so much better off that they benefit from these migrant communities, where rural communities are so impoverished and there's so little opportunity in rural America that rural America actually sees these people as a threat. And again, I'm not speaking here from personal opinion. I'm speaking from just pure analytics. It is possible that rural whites that live in cities benefit from migrants, and thus they have a positive view of them, while people who live in rural America are harmed by their presence, and thus they have a negative opinion. And thus the opinion of whites when they look at migrant groups doesn't even have to do with your personal opinion of how you feel about racial equality, but more to do with your social economical position and whether you benefit from it or whether you are deprived from it. Now, I know that nobody wants to hear that. Whites that live in urban areas might feel that they're kinder and more compassionate than rural America, and that's why they have a different view. But in reality, it perhaps isn't your compassion, it's just numbers themselves. And people in rural America may not want to hear that either. This is one of those times where the answer, the real reason why something is the way it is a reason that nobody likes to answer to. And rural America might feel that migrants and Hispanics really are a detrimental force to America because that's how they see it in their communities. But it's benefiting cities in the country greatly. So it's one of those deals where neither the people in the cities that are white want to hear this, nor the people that are white in the rural side want to hear this. And in general, it seems like the real answer to today's question is that a lot of times rural America sees these people as a threat because in their communities, opportunities are limited and it really is taking a job from somebody. But if you look at the overall well-being of the country, people that live in cities depend on these people, and it actually benefits them that their presence is there. And again, one of those questions that the answer is an answer that maybe nobody likes the answer to. Perhaps you feel that your opinions on today's conversation are based solely on your ethical beliefs. Either you're a rural American and you believe that this is a bad thing, or you're in the city and you think you're compassionate. But the reality is, it all comes down to just simple numbers. It either benefits you or it harms you, and it benefits a lot of people and it harms others, and that's where people derive their opinions from. And that's what's interesting about today's video, is that it doesn't seem like one person is compassionate and the other person is hateful based out of just their personal disposition, but out of just analytical information. That's what you're most propense to think. Now, you can't deny the facts. South Florida is clearly a safer place than North Florida. Nobody's really getting shot down here at the same rates. When you look at drug overdoses, the same exact conclusion can be drawn. In fact, even in metrics of health that are almost irrelevant to today's topic, I'm still going to bring them into the picture just to illustrate to you how much of a point I want to make here, that South Florida is just analytically better than North Florida, no matter how you put it. Cancer deaths directly related to tobacco use. You can clearly see South Florida is mostly green, with the exception of Okeechobee County, which North Florida can keep that crap. And North Florida is plagued with these types of deaths. It's just a general health metric, but again, you can clearly see how South Florida is again better at everything than North Florida. Now, one interesting thing that I discovered during today's video, and we're talking about race and crime and just general society problems based by race, I noticed that since 2009, there was a flip-flop. It was the white population who used to have the most care for mental disorders, and now the African American community is more likely to be taking treatment for mental disorders. When we narrow down to a county level, you can see in Polk County, Florida, right up until 2009, most races were about the same when it came to assistance with medical related issues of the mental health category. Well, in 2009, the black mental health situation became even more evident on analytics. Now, what happened in 2009? Well, Obama became president and he changed the way healthcare in America works. And perhaps that led to more African Americans receiving the help that they needed for their mental health crisis. And now, it used to be that whites were the ones that were receiving the most assistance for mental health, and there was a complete analytical flip-flop. Now it's actually blacks that are having the most numbers of people being looked at for mental health problems by rate. So what conclusion do you draw from this piece of information? You can draw two conclusions. One, African American people became crazy after Obama took power. Or two, African American people were now able to access health care, and they took advantage of this opportunity to address their mental health problems that before were being not addressed. And that's an interesting way to look at things. See, you can look at things from two different perspectives. When you look at an analytic, you can say, well, now black people are completely crazy. Black people are taking more mental health than ever before. They're really struggling. Or you can say, well, maybe now they have more access to health care and thus they're taking advantage of it. Before, they weren't able to have that access to health care. You can draw any of those conclusions, but it just goes to show how a piece of information by itself doesn't tell the whole picture. There's a lot of things happening in the background. I could have made a lot of different claims, but it seems like the most logical claim is that in 2009, African Americans didn't have access to healthcare. When you look at this chart here, you can see that these two lines correlate. And sometimes when you do analytical research, you'll see correlations in all directions. Even when you compare states like Florida and California that are on two completely opposite sides of the country, many times you'll see those correlations. And you can learn a lot from that. Sometimes when you have good analytical information, you can draw some pretty good conclusions. But if you narrow down on just one specific metric of information, you can really put out a deceiving context. You're not seeing the whole picture. And I think today with things and information and media and all the agendas that people have, a lot of times they'll grab one piece of information and they'll make a point based off of that. But if you were just to zoom out and look at the whole picture, you'll see that you can make points that are completely contrary to those that are being made with the same information. But if you're looking at analytical information, you really need to zoom out and look at the whole picture to understand what's going on. Because like we said today, if I were just to look at the poverty rates of the white population in some rural counties that have large Hispanic populations, I could definitely make the point that Hispanic communities are taking white jobs. But look at Miami-Dade County. Not this case there. Again, you have to look at every piece of information. And what you'll find is that sometimes there is no point to be made. There are places where the Hispanic community is taking white jobs, and there are places where the Hispanic community benefits those communities. Does that mean that either one of these groups is receiving false information? No. It just means that different places have different situations going on. Now, you might live in rural America and you might think that the way you see things in your community are the only thing that things work. That this is all there is to it and that's it, because it's what's in front of you. But if you narrow out, travel America like I have, and just study analytics about different states and start to compare one place to the next, you'll start to see that there's places where a scenario can play out that's positive and negative, and overall, that both narratives are kind of wrong or misleading, because rural America and urban America just function in two completely different ways. And in one state, you could have laws that make things happen in a certain way, and go to the next state, it's completely different. In other words, a lot of people are just narrow-minded. They only see one single side of a story. They never zoom out to see the whole picture. In the case of those 3 comments that we examined at the start of today's video, people that say, well, they're from Fort Myers and they've seen the white communities leave and the Hispanic communities turn the hoods. Yeah, but you've also seen the entirety of all the growth that's happened in Lehigh Acres, Florida, is 70% Hispanic. And those are people that are moving into new houses. And it's almost always people that moved away and said, well, when I lived there, it was all white people, it was great, and now it's all Hispanics and it's horrible, so boom, there's the correlation. At least that's the way they see it. But if you zoom out and see the big picture, you'll notice that, for example, in the case of Fort Myers, the poorest, most crime-ridden area isn't the Hispanic communities. There's poor Hispanic communities, by the way, that have a lot of problems, like Tice, for example, and that's the community we're talking about today, but there's also a lot of white communities like North Fort Myers. Why haven't you mentioned North Fort Myers? North Fort Myers did exactly the same thing that Tice did, even to a larger extent. Crap, at least in Tice, you don't have all these overdoses. To say that what happened in Tice 100% represents the entirety of the Latino community in Southwest Florida is outright retarded. Naples, for example, the Golden Gate Estates properties start at $500,000. There's entire regions of the Golden Gate Estates that are 40% Hispanic, and those properties are starting at $400,000 if you can even find them. Most likely, you're going to spend $500,000 to get into these rural communities. And Collier County, because here's the thing, you're making a point based off of Lee County, a county that's plagued with addiction, crimes, and problems. Go to Collier County. Naples, Florida has some of the lowest homicide rates, lowest overdose rates. South Florida as a whole is one of the best places you could live. And what do you think South Florida is? Hello, Miami Hispanics. You just can't say that this Tice community wholly represents the entire picture of Latinos. Cape Coral is 20% Latinos. Cape Coral is one of the best places analytically in Florida. Coral Springs is one of the most diverse places in the entire state of Florida. Lowest homicide rates, highest incomes. We could really go on and on about communities. The Golden Gate Estates, Cape Coral. You could endlessly go on and on with communities in South Florida that have the lowest homicide rates, lowest drug overdose rates, and they're communities that are completely diverse. So that narrative of diversity brings trouble isn't analytically possible. Like recently, they've started this whole hating Venezuelan people thing, And we've heard all these gangs, Venezuelan gangs are coming over here. Tren de Aragua, and this and that. The Venezuelans are horrible. All this crap you hear about Venezuelans. Dude, Doral, Florida is analytically the safest city in the country by homicide rate year after year after year after year. And it's like mostly Venezuelans there, to the point that that's where Donald Trump has his freaking golf course. You think they're just going to put that there anywhere? No, dude, these are very, very wealthy areas. And the people that live there don't do drugs, don't commit homicides. But when you turn on the media, they're putting Doral out to be this horrendous place. Now, most of Hispanic radio in South Florida is Republican. And it's so sad to see so many Hispanics repeat all this garbage. Like, I hear people that I love, family and people that I love that are Hispanic, repeating all this garbage. Like, you don't hear about the Venezuelans. And I'm like, dude, they're in the safest city with the highest incomes, the lowest drug overdose rates, literally the best place to live in all the United States. Why are they demonizing them? It's because they're immigrants just like you. But that's the power of media. If you just tell people something and repeat it to them and repeat it to them and everybody else does the same thing, it gets to the point where people actually believe this misinformation. But the information is available. And unfortunately, people are very easy to program. If you just tell somebody something and repeat it to them, they'll get to the point where they actually believe it and they never even question the reason why it's like that. Me, I've never been like that. When somebody tells me something, I want to verify it first. In the case of crime by race in Florida, it seems like there's a lot of regional areas that disproportionately make life harder for a lot of people as a whole. Currently, the drug overdose epidemic, which is leading to a lot of the crime and homelessness and issues that we're facing in Florida, the white community is at the heart of it. Does that mean white people are evil? Does that mean white people are bad and criminals? As a Hispanic, I've never looked at white people as they're bad because they're dealing with this problem. In fact, I look for ways to help the white population understand so that they are not victimized by this situation. The black population is 5 times more likely to see a gunshot wound than the white population. Does that mean that black people are criminals that are out there shooting people and getting shot at? No, it means that black people are having issues that they need help with. See, I don't look at the white population as a bunch of drug addict criminals. I look at the white population as good people with good intentions, and they need help. For some reason, they're more propense to addiction, and we need to understand why they're more propense to addiction. And I've put a lot of thought into why the white population is more propense to addiction. As a Hispanic, when I look at the black population, I understand they're much more propense to end up getting shot than anybody else. But I don't see them as gun-wielding criminals. When I see the black youth, I try to be the best example that I can for them and give them as many opportunities as I can and educate them on what these problems are so that they don't end up being another analytic. And you know, if you're white, you don't exactly have to be an analytic for drug abuse. If you're black, you don't exactly have to be an analytic for getting shot at. Now, I will tell you this. If you are a white person and you're living in rural America, you are much more likely to end up as one of those analytics. If you're a white person and you seek higher education and live in better communities, that will help you stay clear of that. And even here in South Florida, we still have a lot of homeless white people, and a lot of them are drug addicts, about 95% from my calculations. So that doesn't save them from this plague either. It seems that when you look at the Hispanic community, the problems that we face with crime and contributing to crime in the state of Florida, a lot of scam, a lot of fraud, a lot of no driver's license. And I do try to educate my family that decides to come to the United States on the reality of the United States. This is a country where you gotta have a license, you gotta have insurance. There's a lot of responsibility and bureaucracy involved with living in this country, and that's informality that they come with from other countries that they don't really understand that in the United States, all your paperwork has to be right. You have to have your vehicle insured. You have to have a good credit score. All these things that are part of the American economical system, I tell my family, and anytime I find somebody that just arrives to the United States, they get a very long speech from me on what they need to do to acclimate accordingly to the United States. Does this mean you have to strip away your culture and your identity and become this just freaking bland white person now all of a sudden. No. It doesn't mean that I have to. See, that's the thing where people get it twisted with acclimation. Acclimation to the United States means you have to have insurance, you have to have all your paperwork up to date, you have to know the laws that are constantly changing. All that I explain to somebody that is Hispanic that comes to the United States for the first time so they can acclimate to the economical system. When it comes to their culture, who the crap told you that they had to acclimate to this country? A lot of people from Hispanic backgrounds like to play music loudly on the beach. Is it illegal to play music loudly on the beach? If it's not illegal, you can do it. Does everybody have to like it? No, they absolutely don't. Now, there are decency and respecting other people and treating other people the way you would like to be treated. That plays a little bit of a role, and that only comes with education and class that not everybody has. But it's not illegal. But a huge part of the problem that rural America has with Hispanics is that they want to impose all these other things upon us that are not laws. It's your personal opinion, and I don't need to change my culture just because I come to this country. I have to respect the laws. I have to have car insurance. I have to take care of following and obeying the laws and regulations, but that doesn't mean you have to impose your culture on me or that I have to suppress my culture or identity to please you because you don't like me. That's not required. And a lot of Hispanics try to kiss up to this, and Asians do it too, and Arabs, and all of us that move to this country, a lot of us are tempted to try to change our identity, our appearance, and our culture and customs to try to please Americans that no matter how much you do, they still don't like you. Because when you finally become that puppet that they want you to be, you still realize that you're getting treated differently because you look differently. So what the crap is the point of stripping away your identity and the person that you are to please somebody else? African Americans have the same exact problem. That's why a lot of African Americans just give up on self-appearance and give up on health and all these other things because they feel like, well, I'm going to be looked at as a black person no matter what. But here's the thing. You set the bar for self-respect. It's not you the way other people view you. You're the one who has to set the amount of respect that you get. You're the one that sets it. So if you're a black person and you walk up in here with a certain appearance, you know they're going to be judged a certain way. Does that mean that you can't have your culture, you can't have your identity? I mean, that's a personal decision on where you choose to draw the line. Have you seen some of the tattoos that some of these dudes that I interview in these homeless camps have? If you pay close attention, a lot of them have tattoos like lightning bolts and other symbols that mean certain things. Me and them have a normal interaction. It doesn't trip me up that this guy's got whatever tattooed on his face and they don't seem to care that I'm Hispanic. We go about our interaction normally. It doesn't become a problem. And the same thing with a black person. I don't give a crap if a dude's got dreads and if he's got a good presentation, he's well dressed, he's healthy. But if you come up in here and you just literally have the dreads, you got an old piece of crap car, you have to beat the stereotypes too. So like talking on black people, if you're African American, you also have to beat the stereotype. If you come up in here with some dreads and you're driving around an old beat up car and your clothes doesn't look well kept, now how do you think people are going to perceive you? Now, am I saying that you have to now change who you are as a person? No, dude, but like, you should realize, okay, if you're going to think I'm this, I'm not going to match that narrative. I'm not going to match that stereotype, and I'm going to do something to let you know that you have to respect me and treat me differently.
Django is a free man, you understand? You can't treat him like any of the...
You want I should treat him like white folks?
No.
See, the movie The Django just goes to show that they're never going to treat you the same, so don't even try that. You know you're not going to be treated the same, but the level of self-respect that you give yourself, the dignity that you carry yourself around with, isn't something that somebody else is going to impose upon you. Give you an example. When I moved to Alabama, which I eventually had to move out because of racism in the area, my neighbors told me that out of all the neighbors who ever lived in that property, okay, now I had 2 neighbors tell me this. Actually, 3 neighbors. Because even the ones that didn't like me had to admit none of the people that lived in this house before me kept the lawn the way I did, improved the property the way I did, were as considerate to the neighbors the way we were. They told me that the people that had lived in the house before me, it was a rental property, it was a rotating basis of people, were addicts, domestic violence, arguments, fighting, throwing things, leaving garbage everywhere, being inconsiderate to their neighbors. The day that I moved from Alabama, the lady across the street told me, she cried in front of me, and she said, Jose, Out of all the people that have lived in that house, you guys have been the best neighbors we've ever had. And even the neighbors that kind of contributing to us leaving our property told us we're afraid of what's going to move in, because before you guys came, all the other people that were here were so much problem. You guys cleaned the property, you kept it well. We didn't have to worry about you stealing from us. We didn't have to worry about you doing anything crazy to us. You were just the best person that's ever lived in that property. And 3 of my neighbors told me that. But interestingly, even though they recognized that I was better by the way I carried myself, 2 out of those 3 people contributed to me having to leave that property and it not working. So just because somebody recognizes the fact that you're better doesn't mean that they're going to give you the respect you deserve or allow you to have your position that you deserve. They're still going to push you out. But at the same time, the example is set that they know the way I carried myself was respectable. And that's the thing you have to understand about discrimination. Look, I could never be the 1% of earners in the general population. I can't expect to have a house on the beach like the rich white people that own this country and inherited it from their great-grandparents. But I can be the 1% of earners among my particular demographic. So don't compare yourself to what other people are. Compare yourself to what you can be. What is the best that I can be? Because at the end of the day, when you go to a beach, let's say, and you go with your black family or your Hispanic family, the people around you are watching you. Now, do they have to like you? It's not. I don't give a crap if you like me or not. It's not about people liking you or not. It's the way you carry yourself. And sometimes you can carry yourself in a dignified way that earns and merits respect, or you can leave garbage behind and be a hindrance to everybody there, and then you're the one that's doing it to yourself. Now, just because you carry yourself with respect and dignity, does that mean that everybody there is going to give you respect and dignity? Absolutely not. And that's when you do turn the music up louder. But you don't leave garbage behind. You understand? You're the one. You understand what I'm saying? I sound like the white guy. You understand what I'm saying? No, that's not what I'm saying. You get what I'm saying? That's the reality of it. You're the one who has to carry yourself in a fashion that's dignified. Are they going to respect you? Are they still going to discriminate you? It's not going to change the way they do it for them. It's not about them. It's about you. The way you carry yourself, the way you present yourself, the way you demand your respect, the way you get it. Those people in Alabama can say they don't like me because I was Hispanic. They can't say I was a hindrance to their community. They can't say I had my property in disrepair. They can't say I didn't mow the grass better than they did. They can't say I was doing illegal things and contributing to crime. Whether they like me or not, they have to recognize that I'm a hardworking person, a clean person, a dignified person, and they have to respect me for that foremost. When they talk about Jose in that neighborhood for as long as I ever exist, they're going to have to say, he fixed that house up. His grass was mowed. He wasn't up. The cops weren't there because he was having a domestic dispute. They weren't drugged out screaming at each other on the front lawn like some people like to do. You get the respect that you give yourself. And in the case of racial discrimination, you're not going to change people's minds, but you are going to prove them wrong. And this is where analytically, you can't be that analytic. You understand? Like me, I've done everything I can to distance myself from the stereotype that Hispanic people have. I'm going to pursue education as much as I can. I'm going to stay out of criminal activities. And that's kind of the thing. And look, Miami. Miami has, among the Hispanic population, the lowest drug overdose rate of the entire state of Florida. And when you ask some stupid hick in Ocala, what Miami, the first thing that come out of their mouths, Miami was built on drug money. It's just a bunch of drugs and criminals. The reality never sets into those people. So even if you analytically become like the case of Miami, Miami has the lowest drug overdose death rate. It's one of the safest counties by homicide rate of any large city its size. If you get into the particular neighborhoods, then it kind of distorts everything else. But you can't sit here and tell me that Miami isn't in every health metric outstanding, other than the fact the homicide rate is a little bit higher than the national average is on one thing Miami has. But if you look at certain cities like Hialeah, Doral, a lot of those cities are a quarter of the national average, or you can say at least half. So the fact that you get your crap together doesn't mean that it's going to be perceived that way by other people. they're still gonna treat you and see you the same way, even if you get your crap together. And that's the interesting thing about these analytics. Like in the case of Hispanics, we're accused of being the reason why the drug overdose death rate is so high amongst the white population. They're the ones doing it. Nobody's forcing them. They volunteer for that one. But then they want to say it's us. But when you look at the analytics, like, West Virginia and Maine have the highest drug overdose death rate. They also have the lowest percentage of foreign-born population. So is it the foreigners who are doing it or you? Interesting question. All the metrics that I have ever studied about importation and how it affects communities would point to the fact that it's actually port cities, the way things are getting to America. But they want to paint the narrative that it's the border, even though Texas has the lowest overdose death rate of any state. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good of a job you do, people are still going to portray you and label you the way they want. But you know what? It doesn't matter how people view you. You have to be better, not because you're going to be recognized to be better. You just have to be the best person you can. And a lot of times when you deal with stereotypes that I've seen, like in the Deep South, for example, is that like for example, when I lived in Alabama, like the African American people, they have no respect for each other. They don't even love themselves, so how could they love other people? Like I live in Sarasota now. Do black people here wear their gold chains? They wear their outfits. You know what I mean? They got the sunglasses. They going fresh, okay? You see black people here in Sarasota where I live now, and they're fly, they're clean, they're presentable. You understand? You see African American people in Alabama, bro, and they just have a bad appearance. You can tell their hygiene ain't that well kept. It's a self-respect thing. You have to give yourself that self-respect first. Nobody's going to come out and give it to you. So if you just buy into all the stereotypes and just give up on trying to be better, believe the narrative that they're telling you, then you do actually become that stereotype. And that's where you as an individual, whatever stereotype you have to fight off. If you're a white person, then you have to try extra hard not to be that white person that's an addict. If you're Hispanic, whatever it is your race is dealing with, be the best version of yourself that you can be, and don't ever give them a reason to say, look at him. That's it right there. If right now it's a Cuban living in Florida, I get arrested for insurance fraud or for stealing a dump truck or for having a freaking sea turtle in the back of my truck or whatever the stereotypes are about Cubans, right? Whatever those stereotypes are about Cubans, if I get caught doing that, what are people going to say? Look at him, Rodriguez, in the comments section, typical suspect. You do it to yourself. I can't change the narrative that other Cubans have. There's Cubans that steal dump trucks. They steal horses to eat them. They get caught with 20 sea turtles in the back of their truck. You know, they get caught with fake credit cards, buying diesel, ripping off gas stations. I can't change the stereotype that me as a Cuban will get based off of how other Cubans behave. I can't change that. You ain't gonna catch me being that though. And that's all I can tell you. Don't you be that stereotype. Don't you be the person to give somebody else a reason to say typical suspect. Now me, let's say I'm an Uber driver. Sometimes I'm Uber driving and I end up with some black people in the car. And they're doing everything a stereotypical black person in this country would be said to be doing. You know, and then you're like, well, you know, who's the racist? Am I the racist for noticing it, or are you the racist for being it? Because at the end of the day, when you play into stereotypes, you're also propagating racist agendas against your own people. You're giving people a reason to point a finger at your own people, and that makes you a piece of crap for it. You know, you are giving people a reason. The same thing can be with Hispanics. I'm a Hispanic. Hispanics are known for being bad tippers. So what do I have to be? I can't be a bad tipper. If I go on the Uber ride, I got to break the homie off good. Because I can't be that stereotypical Hispanic. And white people, you got to do the same thing, believe it or not. If white people have a stereotype for one thing, you can't be that stereotype. Whatever it is a stereotype is against your people, you cannot be that. You can't be that stereotype. You can't give people a reason to hate you. That doesn't mean you have to strip off your culture, hide and pretend to be somebody you're not, or become a little puppet of other races. That's not what I'm saying. I'm definitely not saying that. I'm not that. In fact, I see Cubans many times, they try to portray that they're these like super, the fashion they pull and they get all deep into this crap. And at the end of the day, dude, those people don't consider you an American. It don't matter how you vote or what flag or sticker you put on your car, dude. To them, you're never going to be the American you think you are. So why, that's like the people that, you know, I met a Puerto Rican guy in Alabama who, he was in the military. First, he's a U.S. born citizen. He's already a born American, but he also went to the army because he wanted to feel more American. And at the end of the day, when he stops at a gas station in Alabama, they call him a Mexican because at the end of the day, that's all they see you as. So what's the point of kissing up to somebody who at the end of the day isn't going to give you even the little merit that you deserve? So, you know, you just got to know that.